ask permission of the senior monks, the Sangha, to say a few words on Dhamma, and extend my greetings to everybody that's gathered here today. I'm sitting next to the speaker, so I'm having a very interesting experience, like being inside my own voice. We're about a week into our winter retreat, which is the time of year that we set aside our work duties, responsibilities, and really focus wholeheartedly on the practice, formal practice in particular. And for myself so far, it's been pretty inspiring, as it usually is. We start off the winter retreat with a 2-week period of essentially all day long sitting and walking meditation with a few breaks here and there throughout the day. And yeah, it's always quite impressive to see people actually doing it, actually showing up for the sittings, seeing people doing walking meditation, learning chanting, maintaining the silence. One gets the sense of like being around almost like an elite group, Navy SEALs or something. Both lay and monastic, one really gets the sense that we are doing what the Buddha and the Kuba Ajahns admonish us to do. Like the days and nights are relentlessly passing, how well am I spending my time? This is probably as well as one could spend one's time. And obviously it takes a great deal to maintain these sorts of conditions, to free one up, to focus on the practice so completely. And in our case, we have a retreat crew. I believe this year it's 7 or 8 people. And that in no small way make it possible for the monastics to do this and themselves get to do this as well, to plug in. To say nothing of the wide support network, both in the States and in Thailand, that even makes it possible for us to be able to live this life. That's something that I've always found very inspiring and very humbling. And remarkable, really, that basically everything, my clothing, shelter, food, medicine, it's all provided, it's all given. It's like a scholarship of sorts. And in return, for myself to feel like I'm earning my keep. It's simply to have the goal in mind, to have the goal, liberation of the heart, the cultivation of Dhamma, as my intention, as what I'm doing. And as long as I'm doing that, I feel okay about receiving this treatment, this hospitality, these provisions. I have a family member once, and I don't think this is an uncommon attitude, especially from an American. Sort of like, what does a monk do, or a nun? Sort of like lazy folks who aren't contributing to society. And I suppose in one way, sure, but in another way, absolutely not. But I think it could also be possible for a younger monk to think, they're not contributing as much as, say, a senior monk. But I think of somebody in medical school and the absurdity. I don't know how long medical school is, 8 years, 12 years, maybe possibly 4 years, but either way, a few years, a great deal of time. They show up for class and someone demands that they operate on a body, perform surgery on this person. Otherwise, you're earning your keep. As opposed to giving them time to learn and to develop, to learn their craft. And I see it in a similar way. We're investing in people. Giving people the opportunity. And I also do see monastics as providing a very useful service and role in the world. And it's interesting because America, we're a very young country, but we don't really have this a tradition of monasticism so much. Whereas in, let's say, like Thailand or Southeast Asian countries, they do for thousands of years in some cases. And I think people who plug into the monastery get a sense of why this is so, either wandering monastics or more resident monastics in our case. Of holding a space, maintaining a space, looking after the monastery, looking after the practice. And hopefully when people come, they can feel a sense of calm or a sense of peace or a sense of safety. That they can, to some degree, take refuge in. And so hopefully, in our small way, we're providing that, both internally and externally. A big part of how we do this is through the practice of communal harmony. And I don't know if Lumpur Pasano has been emphasizing this as the entire time I've been here, and I'm just only now cluing into it more. But I feel like more and more whenever he leaves the monastery, he leaves on a note of look after each other, take care of each other. Really emphasizing this, because I don't think it's an inherent strength in most Westerners. There's like an inherent ability to get along with each other. It takes, in my experience and my observations, a great deal of practice. Whereas to generalize, completely generalize, my experience in Thai monasteries, in the Isan in particular, it does seem to come more naturally to Thai people in that culture. There's a more natural sense of kindness, of levity, and generosity. And I think for us, it takes a little bit more practice. We don't necessarily excel at this, and it takes work. But it's work that's worth doing, that's extremely important. And it's also work that for myself I didn't always value, I didn't always see the point of. When I first came to monasticism, I think out of the three jewels, Sangha was by far the one that I valued the least. I certainly valued the Sangha in the sense of the Savaka Sangha, enlightened beings, any beings who obtained any of the paths and fruits, any sort of realizations, teachers. But as far as the actual Sangha around me, I didn't get it. I saw it as, this is something for me to do on my own, maybe with a teacher, and more of a solitary pursuit. And other people, to a certain degree, were kind of just in the way. Getting in the way of my practice, as opposed to actually being my practice. One of the great strengths of the way Ajahn Chah sort of set up his monasteries, there's an emphasis both on the solitary practice and on the communal practice. A great deal of emphasis on the communal practice, meeting together frequently, working together. It's a wonderful fit for, again, generalizing, for many Westerners, because we need a little work in this area. But if we can do it, and if we can become adept at it, it will greatly benefit our solitary practice and our sense of peace. For example, if you freak out at somebody or snap at somebody, you're going to feel bad about it when you go back to your hut, sometimes for the rest of the afternoon, because it's just going to be you and yourself and your recollections of whatever happened. But if you can somehow navigate that first half of the day, which is how ours is usually set up throughout the year, together for the first half of the day, then when you do get back to your hut in the afternoon, you maybe didn't do anything too egregious, and you can sort of feel okay about yourself, feel okay about the people that you're living with. And it's funny how much of it simply comes down to kindness and respect. But really, if you had to pick one, just kindness. It's not easy, perhaps easier for some than others. There's a play by, I believe it's John Paul Sartre, called No Exit. And I think it's two men and one woman in a room that I believe has no doors or windows, and the people have no eyelids. And it's he's an existentialist, so it's not a terribly bright play. It's not a comedy. And I think he was also famous for the quote of "hell is other people." And for some it can feel that way sometimes. I don't know if the Buddha would be totally on board with that one. I think one sees over time that it's not the case. That it really, whether it's hell or heaven, other people, it's really on us completely. That's the opportunity, that's the possibility. How we relate to one another, how we relate to other people, how we see other people, how we treat other people. What we project onto other people. What other people as mirrors reflect back to us about ourselves. It's extremely rich, and it could provide a lifetime of practice. And as Ajahn Panyavado put it, one can get rid of a lot of one's grosser kilesas living in community. The way Ajahn Chah set up his monasteries testifies to this. Myself, I found it to be true. And I almost see it for myself as like two veins, two arenas of practice that I need to be able to navigate. I need to be able to go back to my hut, to be alone, and to be okay, to be at peace with what comes up there. And I also need to come down the hill, be around other people. Sometimes it's easier during the winter retreat when we're not talking to each other. And to communicate with other people and engage with other people and work with other people. And be centered and be calm and be at peace and be kind, loving. And it's a tall order. And I think some of us will naturally be a little bit better at one than the other. Some people will be perfectly fine interacting and talking and doing, but then just sort of drown when they go back to their huts and they're by themselves, and other people be perfectly content, up alone, sense of solitude all in their hut, and then suddenly they're around other people and they're just getting their buttons pushed right and left. And this is good. This is what's supposed to be happening. The rock tumbler. You throw all these rocks in, I don't know, I've never actually seen a rock tumbler, but that's the metaphor, I believe, some sort of barrel perhaps. And the rocks are all rough, and in the end they get smooth from jostling and banging and crashing against one another, probably for years. But if we can commit to this, and if we can value this, and if we can have faith in this, that there's a point to this, it can work. You can see the proof in some of the elders in our Sangha. Ajahn Sumedho, I think, has been through a great deal of rock tumbling. Lumpur Pasano. Ajahn Viradamo. For myself, it's almost like infomercials and testimonials. Satisfied customers. Like, this works, I've done it, it worked for me. And, okay, you meet these people, you get a sense that they've gotten somewhere with the practice, and be like, okay, 40 years, 50 years. In some respects, it's a small price to pay for that kind of peace. To say nothing of the possibility of complete liberation. But I think it's easy to have an ideal in mind of what that's going to look like, what that road, that path, some hut in the mountains. And that's certainly an option and a possibility, but it's not the whole. It's certainly not the whole way as laid out in the Thai forest tradition and in these Ajahn Chah monasteries. So I think it's important to see the communal practice not as just something to put up with while you're doing the real practice, but as very much an integral part of the real practice with skills that we need to learn in order to reach the goal. And if we can sort out our stuff with other people, we will at the same time be sorting out stuff with ourselves, and vice versa. And they go hand in hand. And it's remarkable, as Buddhist monks, it's such a solitary life in some ways, to learn so much about relationships and skillful relationships and how to relate to other people skillfully. And just how much compromise is involved, how much forgiveness daily, multiple times a day, sometimes like in rapid fire succession. How much surrender, how much letting go. These are all dhammas, these are all upaya, skillful means. It's always been interesting to me that forgiveness is not one of the 10 barmi, and though the 10 barmi are not, it's not like a necessarily a Theravada way of framing the Buddha's teachings, I've found it to be a very, very useful list. Forgiveness, I think, usually one perhaps would think of Christianity. It's such a Christian value. Certainly loving kindness and the forgiveness, but yet every time we leave the monastery, not like to go to the doctor, but let's say going to leave for a few months, or you're going to go to live at a different monastery now. There's a ceremony that we always do. Candles and incense, bowing to the senior monk and asking forgiveness for anything that I may have thought, said, or done by body, speech, or mind, intentionally or unintentionally. I ask your forgiveness. And the senior monk in turn asks forgiveness of the pupil. So it's sort of built into the machinery. And sometimes, sure, perfunctory, just going through the motions, but it's always a useful reminder. And I think it gets in there, into the blood, into the tissue, day after day, year after year, to the point where it feels quite natural for me to, when I go home, I found myself, when I visited my father and my stepmother, just on the way out the door, just asking forgiveness, and it just felt so natural. If I did anything, if I said anything, I apologize. And also the other half of it is the expression of delight and gladness for anything that you've done by body, speech, or mind. That was good, that was a benefit, a sense of mudita. And this structure, this framework, this skeleton, these traditions, it's very, very helpful. Exceedingly skillful. As opposed to go home for a visit, on the way out the door, blame your parents for something, accuse them of something. It's your fault, this. And then you leave on an awful note, and then feel terrible for a few months. I think many monastics can probably speak to this. Living this way, with these values and these traditions, it gets in there. And I think it affects one's relationships with one's family members, friends who one is still in touch with. It's all in line, it's all in accordance, and it's all in tune with the practice. It is the practice. Cultivating internally and cultivating externally. Forgiveness, kindness, compassion, tolerance. Sometimes just patiently enduring yourself or another, or someone said something. How could they have said that? It's so offensive. Or someone's doing something that's completely crazy to you. And it may actually be pretty crazy what they're doing. But, if they're not hurting anybody. Patient endurance is no small thing. It's actually quite a big thing. You can hit it, whatever that is, whatever's happening, you can hit it with this whole arsenal of skillful ways of relating to things, to people. Hitting it with kindness, hitting it with compassion, forgiveness, acceptance. That's one of the amazing things about the practice, or even about existence in general, is that there's options. It isn't like someone's doing something, something happened, and you have this one way of relating to it, and that's it. You're malleable, you're changeable, and it may not always feel that way, and it may take time to learn new skills. But it's doable. And it's really the only work that's worth doing. We have to, and especially for people in the world, we need to put food on the table and provide. This other work is the most important work there is. And it's important to remember that it takes time. And it's not always easy. And be a lot of slipping, a lot of falling, a lot of not catching it. Something flies out of your mouth and you just didn't get it in time. And that's okay. Unless it's something that's so offensive you're going to lose your job. In which case it's still okay, I guess, but it's important to remember that it takes time. And it's a lifelong road. And with that understanding, to be applying all of these things back to yourself that you're working on applying to other people. Because at the end of the day, if you're not in your own corner, no matter how much anybody else wants to be in your corner, it won't really matter. At least as I find for myself, the only one, besides one's teacher, the only one I'm really going to listen to is myself. And if I'm not with myself, beside myself, supporting myself, I'm in pretty bad shape. And I think some people, probably most people, find it even more difficult to relate to themselves with kindness, compassion, forgiveness, than to other people. It's probably very easy to relate to dictators, past historical people who've done awful, awful things with forgiveness. You can forgive, fill in the blank from 100 years ago for what they did. But forgiving, somebody else in your day-to-day life for a much smaller transgression, or forgiving yourself for a much smaller transgression, can be a lot more challenging. Until we can get to a place of seeing things as not self, which is a crucial aspect of the practice, I think most of us have a fair amount of work to do in learning how to relate to ourselves skillfully. I think principally because we come from a society that's grounded in Judeo-Christian values and Judeo-Christian ways of seeing things, principally this idea of original sin is something that's really worth spending a little while thinking about the ramifications of this. Essentially, that you are somehow originally, fundamentally tainted, flawed, or you've done something, you have originally sinned, you've done something at some point, which, I think especially for like hardcore Theravadan Buddhists, this idea of Buddha nature can be something there's a little bit of debate around, but to set that aside for a second and compare that notion of Buddha nature, the notion that your nature is the Buddha, your original nature is the same as that of the Buddha, comparing that with this idea of original sin, those stand in pretty stark contrast. One saying that you are originally, fundamentally pure, complete, good. These notions are worth chewing on, and then perhaps deciding for oneself, choosing how one is going to see oneself and others, and perhaps even how one is going to see existence. Because along with this notion of original sin, a lot of us, perhaps most of us, are very well trained in critical nature, critical thinking. And this is very valuable. And it's certainly not something we want to toss out the baby with the bathwater and get rid of it entirely, because it's crucial for wisdom. But yet, if there's an imbalance in this critical thinking, if this critical thinking is not balanced with expansiveness, openness, acceptance, kindness, softness, we're going to be in pretty bad shape. Probably have a fair amount of anger, negativity. And it's not saying that these things are bad. You have anger, you have negativity, you're critical, you're bad. That's absolutely not the case. You will probably have some suffering. It's more like these things are unskillful, and I think this is such a skillful in it. It's not a moral thing or a good or bad thing. It's simply a practical or impractical thing. This way of looking at things, this way of relating to things, there might be a better way. Sort of like you want to screw something in with a screwdriver, and yet you're bashing away at it with a hammer or a saw. And what you really need is simply a screwdriver, because it's a screw. And it's not like if you're bashing away at this thing, you're a terrible person. You're a bit misguided. And you could use somebody with a screwdriver to come along and point out the error of your ways. And I think in a similar way, you can do a little better in the sense that we can have less suffering in how we relate to ourselves and how we relate to others if we can sort of learn these new tricks and practice these new skills. And that's really all they are. Skills like any other skills, crafts like any other craft. Learning a language, learning a musical instrument. It takes time. It takes practice. Daily. But fortunately, there's no shortage of opportunities to practice these things for ourselves and for others. In time, we can get very, very good at these skills. And they're skills that are wholeheartedly worth learning because they will lead to the cessation of suffering. I was thinking earlier today of the simile of the saw. The Buddha's basically saying that even if somebody is sawing your body apart, bit by bit, limb by limb, and you don't have a heart of loving kindness for this person, then you're not following my teachings. Now, I think you could also say that if you're in that position and you're being sawed apart and you're not able to be completely loving toward the person that's doing it, you should still have loving kindness for yourself, that you're not able to do that quite yet. Hopefully it won't come to that. I appreciate this simile because I think the Buddha makes it so clear that, look, it's everybody, and it's for everything, and no one is excluded. And there's no one that he's like, well, okay, an exception for that guy, because he did X, Y, and Z. And it's simple. Everybody, without exception. And it's a tall order, but it's something to shoot for. And everybody without exception includes you, who sometimes is probably the hardest one of all to have loving kindness for. That word, this word metta, frame it, translate it however it works for you. There's a whole list of options: loving kindness, loving friendliness, goodwill, love. But whatever you do, find a way to get it going. It's easy when we come to the practice to, the brahmaviharas, kindness, compassion, equanimity, gladness, to kind of, poo-poo these or set these aside and say, well, it's a nice bonus sort of aspect of the practice, and it's much more about insight or determination, and these are all crucial as well. But don't toss these out, the brahmaviharas. Somebody I know who went on a retreat with Bhikkhu said that when he was talking about loving kindness for Westerners, I think the way he phrased it was, look, I don't want to say that this is a magic bullet, but this is a magic bullet. Pretty big, I think, for a lot of us. And it can take care of a lot of suffering inside. The Buddha advises for one's fellows, acts of kindness, thoughts of kindness, speech of kindness, and in this way sort of maintaining harmony, maintaining a healthy organism, sort of seeing the community as one functioning organism, functioning thing. And we're not going to get it every time. And there's going to be some people that it's more challenging for, and some people that it's more challenging to have loving kindness with. But that's the deal. If we can do this, we do so much good. It's an offering to oneself as well as to others. In a world that can feel so crazy sometimes, this is very important work. When you're doing this, you're doing a lot. And to remember that this is all part of the big picture. This is all part of the path that leads to liberation. And that's the point. The point is not loving kindness for loving kindness' sake. Though if that's all you did, that's pretty good. But remembering that all this work on samagi, communal harmony, kindness, forgiveness, compassion, is with the aim of complete liberation in mind. And as the Buddha teaches, and as the Kupa Ajahns teach, and as our teachers teach, this is the path. This is the way to complete liberation, to the cessation of suffering. And one can see it bit by bit. If you're filled with anger, you're depressed, if you apply these things and you see your suffering ease, you see peace or well-being increase, you know you're on the right path. You know you are pointed in the right direction. So as we, I think tomorrow, finish up our first week of the winter retreat, just to Express my gratitude and appreciation to the retreat crew, to my fellow monastics, to everybody gathered here today. Everyone's taken this work on, fighting the good fight, as it were.